Hi everyone, welcome to another Coronavirus TV. Today I'd like to talk a bit more about clinical trial disruptions. The topic we haven't perhaps spoken about in a while. I know there's been a lot of interesting things recently with antivirals and even vaccines, but clinical trials is one of those areas where COVID-19 is actually having a really big effect on our industry. There's two reasons why. Hospitals have had to really reprioritize their resources away from things such as clinical trials and toward the COVID-19 frontline to deal with the huge numbers of hospitalized patients. Also, the lockdown measures that have been put in place by governments have meant that patients have been less able to travel or even willing to take part in clinical research because of the fear of catching COVID-19. So because of this, the ability of industry to kind of run clinical trials at the moment has been strongly curtailed. There are ways around this, and these involve things such as digital health and virtual clinical trials, and we've touched upon those in the past. But I wanted to go into a bit more data that shows that perhaps we're actually on the verge of a recovery, and this effect on clinical trials is actually now beginning to wane. So I'm going to try something new for today and just share something with you. So we've been tracking the number of clinical trials that have been affected by COVID-19 in a number of different ways. What I'm showing you today is a look at all of the trials that industry is currently sponsoring. So at any moment in time, there's around 15,000 clinical trials globally, sponsored by a pharma or biotech company. A proportion of these will be temporarily closed for whatever reason, even before COVID-19. So you have this baseline of around 1% of trials that will be temporarily closed for enrolment. Since we've progressed through the pandemic, and we started tracking this at the end of March when lockdown measures have been in place for 2 to 3 weeks, this 1% baseline in purple has really steadily grown, and right to the point where it was approaching 4% of all of industry's trials were temporarily closed for whatever reason. Thankfully, this is actually now plateaued, and yesterday, for the first time, the number of temporarily closed trials actually dropped week on week. So I'll get rid of that. So yeah, what does that show us? It shows us that industry is being able to return to increase its clinical trial capacity at the moment. We've seen it already with statements from Pfizer in its Q1 results saying about how the majority of their trials were actually back up and running in April. But then we also have heard from CROs who are running many of these studies, and they've talked about how they expect the disruption to last right through to Q4, and that many of their clinical trial sites actually remain inaccessible. I think what our data shows is that the truth might be somewhere between those two poles, and clearly there is still disruption going on. Potentially up to 1,000 clinical trials are on hold at the moment because of COVID-19, but the number is coming down, or the proportion is coming down, and this is very much in step with a relaxation of lockdown measures that is happening throughout Europe and in the US too. A delay of 2 to 3 months in clinical trial activity shouldn't be too detrimental to the overall kind of pipeline. Clinical trials tend to be quite elastic anyway, and enrollment rates fluctuate. While lockdown measures have been in place, patients will have still had serious conditions and still wanted to enroll in clinical trials and get access to an investigational drug. Once they're able to, you'd think this bolus of patients that's been building up will, I guess, all enter clinical trials over the next month or 2 months. So actually they'll get rebound measure. Two risks though. First risk is, I suppose, if there's a bit of psychological harm to patients not wanting to seek treatment. And the other risk as well is if there's this a second wave of infections, which mean that the relaxation of lockdown measures needs to be reversed. And then the ability to run a clinical trial is back where you started again, and very difficult because hospitals are deprioritized, away from normal clinical trials. Hopefully an optimistic message, and one that you found interesting. I know there's been plenty of other things on in the news at the moment that we'll touch on in the future, especially hydroxychloroquine clinical trials, because the World Health Organization has now come out quite firmly against. But yeah, we'll save that for another day. But I hope you found today interesting, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye now.